All right, so good to be here. Recording has started. The light's blinking red. Hi, Natalie.
Hey.
My name is Maceo. I am the director of Citizens of Culture, and I came up with this program, No Pressure, No Shame, in 2015 to redefine modern dating etiquette and address the way we come together in romantic partnership, love, sex, marriage, family, all wrapping together because I felt that there wasn't a space where all different types of people could address these different issues. And we've done some events, and now where we are is on a webinar series called Ask a series, and it's a meeting that allows anyone to um, participate and ask questions. But the main thing is going to be talking about the issues at hand. And so I have with us here Natalie Patterson. She's a good friend of mine and a poet and teaching artist, as well as an advocate for survivors and people of color, and does a bunch of amazing things in the world. And we're going to talk about some difficult topics to talk about. I first want to, introduce Natalie and thank everybody for coming. So, if you're at home, online, or watching this recorded, thanks for giving us your time. And Natalie, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. I'll start by framing the conversation. You and I know each other, and I think one of the valuable things about our relationship is that we have an opportunity to discuss what's going on in our dating life outside of being in the dating relationship each other. And we're not of the same gender, and we have our different contexts, but that perspective has been valuable for me. And then, of course, the work that you do gives you an additional perspective. But I wanted to bring you on the show to talk about this stuff because, as we know, our social climate has changed a lot in the past, couple of years. And I know that I've talked to a lot of guys who are like, I don't know if I'm on the level, if I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing, or they think they're great guys, but behind closed doors, they're not getting great reviews, right? And so, and like full transparency, I've had my experience with that as well. Like, I'm a human being. And so I wanted to be honest about that and open and invite you to the conversation. And first, I just want to start with checking in with you and what are what's going on with you today?
Today, oh well, my sinuses are really bad, truth be told. But I'm working on a lot of projects and consulting for a lot of different people. So I'm doing a lot of exciting work and stuff that I'm really, is compelling to me. So I'm in a good place is the truth.
Okay, cool. So the topic, is, I'm going to be typing and stuff, taking notes as well. So if anybody has questions, they can text me. But the topic at hand is power, communication, and courage as it pertains to sex and dating. And why I thought that was important is because those are very interesting elements, and they kind of swirls around what we'll call like the gray area. A lot of people in the past couple of years have been forced to look at their behavior and also the activities they participate in and have been involved in, the interactions. And like, sometimes we look back on things that we've done or things that have happened to us or that situations we've been in, and we have new memories, right? We're looking back on them with maturity and thinking back like, was that all right? Was that okay? Was that not okay? And I know that as a male, when all the Me Too stuff or the Me Too stuff started coming out, I was really confronted with having to look at my own behavior and having to look really closely at the kind of life that I was living. And just to be honest, like, I'm not squeaky clean in that area. And like, but one of the things that was interesting about it, it was really easy to disassociate my behavior from like the villains of, whoever, Harvey Weinstein or whatever. And of course, for a lot of guys, they want to like lean onto that innocence or whatever. and, you know, be like, yeah, that's horrible. Obviously this guy should go to jail, and Bill Cosby is horrible, and Louis C.K. is horrible. And then of course the Aziz Ansari sort of story broke, and there was a lot more conversation around the nuance and like who was right and who was wrong and whose responsibility. And of course, there was a lot of dialogue within genders, even about how that situation got to be the way it was. Continuing to fast forward, having conversations with female friends of mine and conversations with male friends of mine. And a lot of what's come up is that sexual assault? Is that not? What happened here is right or wrong? I know I'm a good guy, but, you know, I don't know. Or a woman saying, I think he's a good guy, and it didn't seem like. But again, we want to bring some clarity to this gray area. And it's not, for me, it's not about the legal ramifications necessarily. It's about our society and how we interact as people, and how we can have better, healthier, safer interactions, and moving forward with that. So that's kind of the framing of the conversation. I guess for me, my first question is, what are your thoughts just around that and your experiences around that in a general sense? We go into some more combo a little bit after, and then we'll go to questions.
Yeah. So I want to first say, like, I appreciate everybody who wants to be a part of this conversation and is like interested in having these conversations, because I think that that's the thing that moves the needle a little bit closer to who we want to be in a world we want to live in, is like people who can actually have these conversations and will spend their evening after work having these conversations. Like, they have to be normalized, and the way that we normalize them is by doing them often, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I was sexually assaulted when I was 19. I was again sexually assaulted a couple of years ago. And I think if I didn't have the resources that I had and the people in my life during those kind of traumatic periods, I absolutely would not be the person that I am. Like, I got, you know, really extensive therapy for free, right? And so if I didn't have access to that resource, I have no idea what would have happened. I'm also a poet, so I'm constantly writing, so that was a form of therapy for me. But I really understand that if I didn't have those resources, I would not be as whole and healthy as I am. And by no means am I perfect, but you know, I think getting help when you have a traumatic experience is really important. So I just want to frame that around, like, I'm a person who's been sexually assaulted multiple times. And as you were talking, Maceo, I was thinking about an experience that I had a couple of years ago. And I was like about to have intercourse with the person. I asked him to put a condom on, and then he pretended like he did. And after we had sex, I saw the condom on the floor. And I was like, realized, oh, he put it on and then took it off, whatever. And the term stealthing has like been created recently, I think. And so there was no language for that, but that's a form of sexual assault also, right? Is if someone is not respecting the parameters that you put forth, then that also is a form of violation. And like, how many times have these, you know, smaller violations happened where we didn't have language to unpack them? And so the most important thing is that we have to begin to be really good at communication in all areas of our lives, so that when we're having conversations with partners or potential partners, it's not, the gravity of it isn't so big. Like, if we're having tough conversations at work and with our friends and with our parents, it becomes much easier to like have boundaries and then stick to them. Or, you know.
Yeah. I'm gonna mute everyone who's hopping on, and you can unmute when you have a question or something. Natalie, yeah, great point. I think that's part of why we're doing this, right? Is to normalize the conversation. And it seems like, for me, that we're all sort of clumsy with this topic. And just the simple fact that there is so much that we have gray area in this conversation is a testament to how much work we need to do. That when it comes to sex and intimacy, we don't really have common frameworks for understanding different people's experiences, and where our experiences fall within a greater range of all of them, you know? And so, one, thank you for sharing your story, and also thank you for all the work that you do and continue to speak on this. So you said something about condoms,
Mm-hmm.
and I forget the word that you used. Stealthing. Can you tell me a little bit about like your experience with creating language around the experiences that we have? Does that, like you mentioned being a poet and like, I don't know, I guess, yeah, creating language around these things. Like, does that help?
Yeah. So for me, and here's the thing is if we don't call a thing, we can't process the gravity of what we've experienced, right? And so oftentimes people will be sexually assaulted, and immediately what happens is you go into trauma. So you either go into like, this is an emergency and I need help right now, right? And you like seek all the resources, or you go into, this did not happen. I must have interpreted this situation wrong. This is not, and you start to trick yourself into, maybe I misunderstood the situation. I'm sure he's a nice person and blah, blah, blah. And I think what's dangerous about that is then we cut off our ability to heal and to really help the movement through our experiences, like, if you will. Because by being really clear, you can create something for somebody else, right? Is that I know every time I talk about this, I'm creating a pathway for someone else to have language. I'm creating a pathway for other people to have resources, or just to simply know that they're not the only person who's experiencing things this way. And the way that I responded to the first time I was sexually assaulted when I was 19 and got sexually assaulted on a date in the backseat of a car, and the way that I responded when I got sexually assaulted a couple of years ago in my house by someone I knew well and had slept with before, I handled those things way different. The effect of it lasted completely different. The first time, it lasted for a very, very long time, the impact of that, and the hurt and the trauma and the not trusting people, all those things lasted so long, where I was like forcing myself to be in relationships with people just so I wasn't like super weird,
Right.
because I didn't trust people. I was really concerned about like men being creepy and pervy and like misleading and all those kind of things. So yeah, I would say communication, like language and naming a thing. If something happened, say what happened, the way that it happened. I think oftentimes we're like, I think about every time that I like tell my story, I think about, every time I see a trigger warning post on Facebook, right? To not re-traumatize the people who've experienced the thing, right? And I'm very conflicted about that, right? Like, of course, I want to protect everybody who's struggling, but I also want everyone else to be traumatized. Like, I want them to be triggered by this and to be alarmed and upset because it is upsetting and alarming. So I really do struggle with that, like trigger warning and how sensitive to be and those kind of things, because like, I just want to be able to tell the truth. And so that's kind of where I like draw the line for myself, is like, I just do what feels right for me, and I say sorry,
Right, because the truth of it is that horrible things happen, and that's the truth.
Yes.
Right.
Pretending that a horrible thing didn't happen, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make it not horrible.
Yeah. Did you ever struggle with the naming part? I know that I've had conversations with women, and I felt like, by using this language, a euphemism, instead of saying, I'll just tell the story, right? So I had a conversation with someone I went out on a date with, and they were not happy with the way the date went. And afterwards, I was like, hey, let's go on a second date. And they were like, no, I don't want to go on a second date with you. And I was like, what? Okay, tell me why, if you want, whatever. She goes, okay, I'm going to tell you why. I didn't like the way our date ended. I felt like you didn't listen to what I was saying, and you were not, I felt scared and I didn't feel respected. And I was like, oh shit. My first brain was like, this is not what happened. I don't know what her experiences are and sensitivity, but we kept talking about it. So the language that she used, she said that I groped her, right? And I thought that was an interesting, concrete word, but I didn't identify that word as my actions, and I didn't understand it as something that I was even capable of.
Mm.
Right? So it's like, I'm this guy, and this is the guy who gropes women, and they're not the same person. And so here's a woman telling me that that happened, and I'm like unable to reconcile. And so I'm trying to get her to use another word.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's very typical of what happens when we tell people that men jump out from bushes and rape you, right? Like, these are the narratives that we have continually told society, that it's not people you know, that it's not your father, it's not these people, but in reality, it is. It's people you know. That's who's doing the sexual assaulting, that's who's doing the raping, that's who's doing the groping, right? And so I think what's really dangerous is we have created a structure and a system in this country that's very black and white. And human beings and life is very gray. And so what I found is important, and like part of my own healing is compassion, right? Is to think about what are the experiences that led a person to be the way they are, as opposed to just naming them right or wrong, right? Because if I get more of the story, I can get more understanding. And, you know, some people are just dead ass wrong, like just totally dead ass wrong, right? But there are people who are poorly educated on the topic. Most people in America, their sex ed experience was like nothing, right? So you don't have the language and the ability to know how to navigate this smoothly. And I think that goes on all sides of the sexual conversation. Like, who told you how to have sex? Who told you how to satisfy another person? Who told you when to stop having sex, or when to no? Like, everybody is navigating this journey through whatever parental lens you were taught. So I think we have to be really careful about. We have to understand what our intention is. So is our intention to be victim or victimizer, or is our goal to heal and to create a community where this stops happening?
Right.
Because if that's what we're choosing, then we have to do more work, right? That means we like have to be having the conversations with our guy and girl and trans friends and go like, what the fuck is up? How do you like, what's going on? You were sexually assaulted. What was that like? You know what I mean? Like, I love the opportunity for people to ask questions, because I would rather you ask me a question and then I give you a really clear answer that then you can navigate your life through, as opposed to just rattling around with questions in your head and then you're giving people really terrible experiences because you have questions that no one is answering.
Yeah, that's a perfect, you talked about black and white and you talked about communication. So using that same experience, one, I was saying that I thought that, someone who sexually assaults someone looks like X and I'm Y, right? And I was thinking about the scenario, and none of this time did I decide that I was going to be like victimizer, victim, right? It wasn't like, this is what I'm trying to do, right? But my training was, from wherever I got it, was that there are like 5 or 6 words that you're supposed to hear in an interaction. And that's how things aren't going well or whatever. And then later in life, like, stop, no, don't, I'm scared, this hurts, right? This kind of stuff. And I went through most of my life waiting to hear, expecting to hear that, right? In a situation. And then later, you read a couple books and you read a couple blog posts, and this idea of enthusiastic consent comes out, right? And then you're like, oh shit, have I been doing this thing wrong the whole time? And you read a blog post as a male, right? I'm just saying, for me, I read blog posts about, quote unquote, bad sex and people having sex that they didn't want to have. And as I like go back in my like sort of Rolodex of very short Rolodex of experiences, I asked myself, based on the rules that I now know to be true, are my experiences up to par and up to the standard of a healthy interaction? And I can't say that they all were, right? And not only that, but I can't say that I've developed the skills to be sensitive to a nuanced, hey, I'm not into this, right? So for me, when we talk about enthusiastic consent and all this kind of stuff, there's an expectation of clarity of communication. But I've come to realize, and I've been told this directly, that there's always a sort of negotiation that women tend to do, right? It's not always necessarily going to be, hey, no, get off me, I don't want to do this, because you kissed her, right? It could be she's afraid and she wants to get out of the situation, and so there may be a more subtle delivery of the sort of, rejection that.
But it also might be more subtle than that, right? It might be, I totally like you and I want to make out with you and I want you to go down on me, but I don't fully want to have sex.
Right.
And so we don't have the social cues and the language to figure out how to say that, right? Like, hey, so I'm down for, check these boxes, right? I'm down for all this. Are you down for all that? Like, that doesn't actually happen. So it's happening in this like fumbling fashion where like you're thinking because we're half naked, this means yes, because we're here. And she's going, yes, but.
Right.
But until later, yeah.
Yeah, so do you feel like, and giving room for people to change their minds and stuff like that, I think context for me, when I think about like my priorities in the situation, even in the past 3 months, they've changed completely from, listening to asking more questions. But that isn't to say that the answers I get, I always understand. Meaning,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We don't all speak the same language the same way, right? Like we might all speak English or, for the most part speak English. That doesn't mean that we're all using language the same exact way, right? I think about the word fuck, right? Depending on your inflection, that word means 500 different things. And so like we have to be like conscientious of that also, that like we think we know what language means, but like, are we looking at body posture? Are we looking at facial expression? Are we thinking about how the mood has changed, how this person is like no longer sitting super close to you, right? It's all the things, it's not just one.
Yeah, so you're incorporating body language into that. And I think along with that, I think masculinity is my experience. And it's really interesting to see how, to be in conversations about power dynamics and, ideas about male privilege and ideas about power differentials and strength differentials in intimate settings, because I think there's a really big conversation socially about how men and women interact, right? Objectification, catcalling, but those are like social paradigms. But when I'm with someone or you're with someone, sometimes there are little nuances that break the norm, right? So this isn't supposed to be, supposedly acceptable or cool, but it's naughty and I like it. So it feels, good or whatever. And so for me, I guess my question to you is, how do you navigate or negotiate those like best practices that you might have read or heard that can be, sort of traditional, like whether people come over on the first date or not, and how you reconcile that with being like a grown-ass person and wanting to like have the fulfilling experiences that you want.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm like a night person. I love to be up at night. I would rather be up all night and wake up at 3 p.m. Which causes like issue in dating, right? Because we're programmed to think that if you hang out with someone after 10 p.m., then there's a possibility of having sex, versus if you meet somebody, if you come over somebody's house for tea at 3 p.m., you're not like, yeah, I'm about to get some, right? We don't inherently think that. But something about the night makes us think that. And so I've definitely had experiences where it like got weird, where I was like, no, I'm totally down to like hang out, but I'm totally not gonna have sex. And I think, we just have to be more brave. I have like become like, I stopped caring whether you're gonna like me at the end of the interaction, because that desire to be liked makes me compromise my integrity. right? So that's something I learned about myself, that if I'm worried about if this dude or this woman is going to like me, then I'm going to bend to their whim, as opposed to like just standing where I stand in a circumstance. So I think for all of us, we have to figure out like really what are our strengths and our weaknesses, such that we know how to navigate these spaces. Like, be thinking about this stuff beforehand, not wait till you're dating someone to then think about how you're going to navigate the space. Like, no, think about it while you're single, so that you're not in a situation where you're compromising yourself, or where you're being compromised, right?
Right. Cool. I want to prime everyone, if you have questions, to get them ready, start thinking about them. If you're on the phone, you can call in. I mean, you can unmute. If you're on video, you can unmute your video, or you can type the question into the chat. All of those work depending on how you want to deliver your question. We'll do a little bit more dialogue, and then we'll open it up and we'll talk more.
And I really want to just say, like, if you have questions, you really can ask me anything. Like, truly, I would rather you ask than sit with the question. And I may or may not have the answer, but I'm happy to process it with you.
Awesome. Communication, power, and courage. You talked about being brave, and integrity, integrous. Is there any way that you think about the I guess the way that you communicate for impact or for understanding, or do you communicate more for, like, personal clarity, right? Like, we were talking about how language is used differently, and like, just to be, and for an example, if I say, oh, we're texting, I'm like, do you like it rough? And you're like, yeah, but my rough and your rough are not the same word. And it's like, what the hell is this? This is crazy.
What's gonna kill you? Like, no, not the same. I don't want that.
Yeah. So when you're communicating, do you think about that nowadays? Like, we talked, you have a poem about love, and we talk about love and what love is, and how, maybe there are people using different words, and what that points to. I guess that's kind of the.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's situational, right? So most times I'm communicating for clarity, right? So that I'm not, like, what I know to be true about my personality is I will sometimes sacrifice myself for someone else's comfort. And then I'm deeply unhappy, right? And so what I've learned about myself is never do that. I'm the best version of myself when I'm not compromising myself, but when I'm fully present and fully engaged, and I can only do that if my needs are met. And so setting myself up for the success of a moment, as opposed to not getting my needs met. It's like when you go to like a conference or something, and you go into some confusing ass building, and you don't know where the bathroom is, and you're not sure if your parking is going to get validated, and like, you're thinking about all of that. How present are you being to the conference for like what you actually came for, right? But if you were just like, hey, where's the bathroom? The parking meter, is that going to expire? And blah, blah, blah. Like, if you just got your needs met in the first few minutes, then you would have an enjoyable time. And I think about that in terms of like sexual experiences, right? Like, there are people who like to have anal sex. I am not one of them. So I just like to say that up front, like, hey, I'm down for a lot of stuff. Here's what I'm not down for. And then we don't have to like talk about it anymore, or we can continue to talk about it or whatever, but I'm clear about where I'm at, and so are you now. And if you don't like that kind of clarity, then we're not well suited. You know what I mean? And just knowing that about yourself, like, I think sometimes we compromise, and we compromise because we want people to like us. And I have definitely been a part of that kind of scenario, and it never has paid off for me to sacrifice myself.
And so tell me a little bit about, on that same note, this idea of, I guess talking about it is not sexy or whatever, being matter of fact,
Look, taking the trash out and doing laundry is not sexy either, but it's a part of life. Do you want the clean clothes? Do you want a house that smells like trash? You know what I mean? It's like, we just have to get over, it's like, who wants to ever get an oil change? Not I. I never want to get an oil change, but I like my car to go. You know what I mean? So it's like, some of it we just have to like get over being divas and get over being like, but I don't like this, or like, this isn't sexy if I have to talk about, like, whatever. Okay, so it's all not sexy. Do you want to do the do or you don't? Because we got to have these conversations first. It's the same thing of like having conversations about what kind of protection are we using with a partner. That's not a sexy conversation, but do you want to have the sex or no? Because that's what we got to go through, some steps to be able to have an enjoyable experience.
Awesome. Well, I'm down for questions. Are you down for questions?
I'm down.
Now would be a great time. We got about 20 minutes left. Here we go. Now, have you experienced confronting your offenders? How did you do it? How did you feel afterwards? What advice would you give for those who are contemplating doing it? Natalie, please answer, and I actually have something to add too after.
Okay, so the first time I was sexually assaulted, I was a part of a really large community, and this person was like a part of the community. So I actually saw him every week or so for the following like 5 years after being sexually assaulted. And it was not a conversation I ever had with him, because I just felt like having that conversation was going to compromise my ability to navigate that community. And so no, I didn't confront him. The person who recently sexually assaulted me, he actually gave me an STD. I got chlamydia. I was in complete denial for like a month that it even happened. Like, I just was like, I do not have time for this. I am a grown ass woman. He's an idiot. I don't have time for this. And a month later, I like went to the doctor and they were like, you have chlamydia. And I was like my head exploded, and I just felt like I wanted to bleach my insides, is like what I felt like. And so I was aware that he had started dating someone. And so I was like, he clearly has chlamydia and I need him not to give that to him. So I had to have a conversation with him and say like, yo, so not only did you sexually assault me, you gave me chlamydia, and this is awkward as hell. But I also was clear that I didn't want anything from him. The thing that was most important to me was that he didn't pass it on, and that he was like really clear that he had it, because people who don't know that they have chlamydia, it can reduce their chances of, it can create infertility. And so I was like, I would hate for some other woman to like be involved with him and not know, involved in whatever way, whether it's consensual or not, but be involved and him not know. Because oftentimes men will have STDs, but they don't present any symptoms, and so they don't know because they don't go to the doctor frequently. And I really didn't want this woman to have the shitty experience that I had. And so I told him, and you know, I mean, I think it was like one of those situations where it was like, well, we just don't see this situation the same. But I was clear that I didn't want anything from him, and I think that's what you really have to be clear about, is what are you confronting this person for? Because if you're like trying to have a conversation because you think that they're a person of some value and you can like help them be a better person, then totally have a conversation. If you don't think that they're a person of value, then you should report them or have nothing to do with them ever, because you don't owe them shit.
Yeah, Michelle, feel free to ask a follow-up. I was going to go there, Natalie. Just as from the male perspective, not that I'm the same as all males, but when there's been 2 times in my life when a woman that I was involved with contacted me after a sexual experience to tell me that something happened that she didn't want to happen. And in both cases, what they told me was that I'm telling you this because I believe you to be a good guy, whatever that means. And that exactly was what they said, is like, so that it doesn't seem like this happened intentionally. I want to tell you about this experience because I want to make sure that you're capable of being the guy that you want to be. Yeah. And so that's amazing. That said, in both cases, I still felt, one, a little bit emasculated, two, initially like rejected her perspective of the entire scenario, not necessarily like to her face or over the phone or anything. I just listened, but I felt in my body, this is not what happened. Like this is an incorrect telling. And so that's just how I responded to it. And I don't know if that's how all men will respond to it, but that's been my experience, that like I said, I had this idea of myself, and someone is providing, constructive criticism about a very sensitive area, in a time that's very sensitive. And even like someone who does this work and is actively trying to like undo patriarchy or whatever, like I still very much was like, no, this is like the social climate. She's more sensitive because of like XYZ. I still tried to rationalize it in my brain and make it make sense before letting it sink in. And so that's one piece, is that if you're expecting someone to be like, oh shit, I'm so sorry, what can I do to change things? That is not
gonna happen.
Yeah. And luckily those are people that are like still my friends, and I think we've moved past it to some degree, but yeah.
Do you think it brings closure? Here's my honest advice: do your own work. Do not think that someone who violated you is going to help you heal. Probably not. I would say go to rape trauma therapy and process all this shit with a stranger who's there to support you, as opposed to thinking that a person who clearly doesn't understand boundaries is then going to be able to be like a supportive person. And obviously I don't know your circumstance at all, so I don't want to speak to that. But unless they're a person that you think is redeemable and is a person who would listen to you, and like and it's like a super gray situation, like, I mean, I think if this happened like with a boyfriend, I think I would definitely like have to have a conversation. So if it's like a boyfriend, husband, partner kind of situation, then like potentially yes, but always think about what you're trying to get out of it. And if your needs don't get met, are you going to be more hurt by that? And would it be more beneficial just to get professional support from people who know how to support you?
Yeah, and my experience was that in one case, I said, hey, you don't want to go out with me, please tell me. I'm interested in knowing. So that's one indicator. But then the other case, the woman said to me, hey, are you open to like hearing? I have feelings about our experience. I have thoughts about our experience. Do you want to know what those things are? And I was like, yeah, girl, tell me what's happening. And she's like, okay, number one, so again, there was like what Natalie said, there was some indication that the person was open to listening.
Also, what was the second part of her question?
The second part, how did you do it? Did you feel afterwards? What advice would you give? What do you think? Do you think it brings closure for the victim, regardless of the reaction of the offender? The act of stating and telling the offender what happened, that and that it happened.
Yeah, I would be really careful of that. I think it's about healing yourself and like fuck the other person in this instance. Like, I'm generally like, kumbaya, we're all one. But like, you need to take care of yourself first, and if someone violated you, they are not going to take care of you, right? They've already shown you who they were, and so you should believe them, to minimize the damage that will continually be done to you potentially. I mean, I'm really, like, I'm not a person who really likes therapy. Like, I hated seeing my therapist, and I like low-key hated her. Like, every session that I went to, I was like, she doesn't get it. I hate her. Like, I mean, like, I did the whole thing, right? The rebellious person in therapy. But what it allowed me to do was to process everything I felt with a person who had nothing to do with my life. right? So I could say anything and she was going to listen, as opposed to like me calling Maceo and being like, hey, this thing happened. And then I'm like, say who the person is. And then when he sees the person, then he's acting weird with you know what I mean? Like, I wanted to just handle it, close it up, and move on with my life, and not, you know, I don't know. I really think trying to engage a person who's violated you is not, I don't think it's going to create healing for you. And I'm open to being wrong, but I just, from being in the experience, I just really, if someone violates me, I don't trust them to be decent at all after that. And in a vulnerable moment, I don't think that, you shouldn't put yourself in their hands, you know what I mean? And not that you're like literally putting yourself in their hands, but I'm not sure what you're gonna get out of it. That you couldn't get closure in some other way that would keep you completely safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Any more questions and additional questions as well? Yeah, make sure the person is on board with being a part. If that's important, make sure they're on board with being part of your healing team before you even try to give them that. I don't know that that's always going to be the case, but I do know that for me, it was helpful to get feedback about the experience that we had. It wasn't, you know, I'm happy to have had someone call me on my shit and say, hey, this doesn't seem like the kind of experience I had doesn't seem like the kind of experience you want me to have. Am I right or wrong? And then I was like, oh shit, that's definitely not the kind of experience I wanted you to have. Thank you for telling me. I'm learning a lot right now. Is there any reconciliatory activity that I can do? And they were like, no, don't call me, but I just wanted to let you know. And I was like, I had to deal with that too. So, you know, that's my 2 cents on the other side. Yeah, on that note, anybody else have questions or additional questions?
And thank you, Michelle, for being brave enough to ask a question. I really appreciate it. And I hope that was helpful. Nothing? Y'all got nothing?
I'm okay with it. Yeah, I'm okay with a little bit of quiet time when people process. But we can also go into another area
Also,
around.
can I just say this? If there are questions that people have that you don't feel comfortable like sharing in a public way, because obviously your name is on here, you're welcome to slide into my DMs, and ask questions or whatever. The invitation is beyond today.
Oh yeah, let's do some of that. I mean, I know I'm going to email everyone your information, but if you want to say it right now so people can write it down, or I'll type it in there.
On all platforms. Natalie, everything's spelled American traditional. Natalie is poetry. NatalieIsPoetry.com.
Is it Natalie is Poetry at Gmail or something?
Natalie is Poetry at Gmail, but if you go to my Instagram, you can just like click one button and message me, or you can go to my website, Natalie is Poetry. This is so cool. I've never done a webinar on here before, so I'm like learning all the things right with everybody.
Yeah, there's tech. We have technology. Anybody else want to ask a question? Because we can keep going as well.
Okay, keep going.
All right, cool. So I guess part of this is related. When you actually did talk to the person, did you find that they were open to acknowledging your side of things?
No.
Right.
I mean, and here's the thing is like, I'm not in any way trying to vilify this person. My experience and his experience were two different experiences based on that we are two different people. And so yeah, they were just two totally different experiences. And when I shared with him, I had no expectation that he would be like, because he's a person who doesn't think that he's a person capable of this, right? And so like, he's a gray area person where we had sex multiple times before. everything was fine, and this one time it was like, this is so bizarre that you thought this was okay. And so no, he wasn't. And he's particularly like a really open person, but it again is that like you become a victimizer and you don't know yourself to be that. And so we haven't created grace in sexual assault, right? We just are like, you did it or you didn't do it, and it's black and white. And so so no, I didn't really anticipate that he would say really anything, and I wasn't honestly interested in it. I was like, wanted to throw up and die and cry and everything all at the same time while I was on the phone. I mean, like, I've never been more terrified to have a conversation in my entire life.
Yeah. What do you, I guess moving forward, you talked about tools and resources that allowed you to do so. And we titled this thing Ask a Survivor. And there is a lot of that language, right? People say victim versus survivor. And we do a grief class with Alua, but I feel like sometimes it's hard to know when that like survivor title is appropriate versus the victim title, right? Something happens to a person that they weren't in control of the result. That's a very real situation, and they can be a victim of someone else's will, right? But also time passes and they see the events or themselves differently, and they then identify as a survivor. Was there any shift in your experience as it pertained to victim versus survivor?
Yeah, I think the moment that I was like willing to fight for myself, and I was like, get up off this floor, quit all this crying and this like, oh my God, which is totally natural. I don't give that to myself because I feel like I'm giving parts of myself to someone else when I like surrender to victimhood. So I like give myself a period of time when anything happens. I'm like, this is totally a reasonable amount of time to be angry or sad or whatever the fuck, right? And then I go, but I know myself to be an incredible, powerful, intelligent, beautiful woman. And that woman, she succeeds. And so in this moment, who do I want to be, right? Do I want to be a person who is a victim? And like, there's a period of time where absolutely I was a victim. After I got sexually assaulted when I was 19, oh my God, I was like a victim for like 4 years. And then there was a day where it was like, sorry, you don't get to write the narrative of my story. You just don't. And I think it's about ownership and about power and taking it back, right? So to me, like, I don't like any of the titles because it's like, it doesn't matter. I just say like, I was sexually assaulted, period, right? And like, that's what it is. Like, the survivor and the like victim, that's not really language I identify with. So I just say I was sexually assaulted, and where I'm at in that process depends on the day, like, depends on who I'm dating and if I feel safe, or you know what I mean. It just depends.
Yeah. One more reminder: if you have any more questions, let me know. I'm gonna be on. We're gonna be on for a couple more minutes. So think about it. Bring something up. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna ask Natalie another question. For the guys that will, okay, great. This is perfect. I was going this direction. What is the conversation amongst male identifying people around sexual consent? Like, are straight men talking to each other about this? And if so, how has that conversation changed in the last year? Also, maybe people having something to contribute to this conversation other than questions, just as a thought. Yeah, we can do that. It sounds like this is a question for me, but Natalie, have you talked to any guys about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think way more guys are talking about it right now because it's like they want to make sure they're not a rapist. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, it wasn't me. Are we cool? Which I kind of like this keeping people on their toes kind of thing, because I think men have been really comfortable in this space for a really long time and just being like, oh, it's not me, I didn't do that, you know, whatever I did was the right thing to do kind of attitude. And of course that's a generalization, so just calm down, whoever like is bubbling up. But absolutely, yeah, men are having these conversations in the numbers that I wish they would be having them. No, at a lot of the talks and the panels and stuff that I'm a part of, there are definitely more men in the space. And so that's encouraging, but also like I would love if every man was having this conversation. If like I wasn't initiating the conversations about like boundaries and you know what I mean? Like I love that Maceo like reached out and was like, hey, will you talk about this with me? Instead of me having to come to him and be like, hey, so I think this is important, maybe you should add this in your programming, right? So that's an indicator of things of things shifting, but for sure more male identifying folks have to initiate and be having this conversation for sure.
Yeah. Two things, I'll answer that question. One, if you want to type a question directly to Natalie in the chat, you just click the 2 and select Natalie and then type it to her, or you can also send a direct question to me as well. Then I will respond to that question as well on my side of things, because, you know, a lot of the conversation is guys looking to sort of, like Natalie said, cover their ass and find out if they're culpable in certain situations and like say, hey, Maceo, you know, women seem to like respect your opinion. Am I on the level with this because I saw you in a YouTube video or whatever? And that's, I would say, the bulk of where the conversation is stemming from. Guys trying not to get guilty or trying not to be guilty of something. And then the second thing is, the next biggest part of the conversation is, I don't know if I have a Me Too conversation in my past. That's the second part of the conversation. Guys asking each other, yo, I mean, I was wilding in college. I probably have, maybe, I don't know if someone's gonna say I did something. And that is just more of a reality that shows people, you know, how their track record compares to the rubric of today. And so there's that. And then a smaller section, but still it's important to note that it is happening. There are, at least in my circle, a large number of straight men. I would say, I don't know, maybe not a large number, but I probably know 20 guys that are interested in the conversation out of maybe 250 guys that I know, that are, you know, interested in talking about how they can, it's connected to being a good lover, right? The conversation around consent and safety is around, no, I want my partner to feel good when they're with me, and I don't want to do things that are like, I want sex to be fun for both of us. I want everything that we're doing to be fun for both of us. And so it's around that. And then a much smaller group on Facebook messages and stuff like that in response to things I post, probably I would say like 7 to 10 guys that I know are having conversations specifically around consent. And they ask questions like, you know, of me, like, well, what do you do if you're drunk and she's drunk and it's going good? And like, you know, it's all these really granular conversations. And for me, one of the things that's missing from the conversation is a disposition and approach that says, that makes us capable of acknowledging what the woman might be going through in that situation. And that's really difficult to understand and to divine. So there's a lot of confusion with straight guys that are interested specifically in consent around, well, if she's not vocal about her wants and needs, I don't know whether I'm supposed to take the lead or not. And that's just my, you know, inside scoop on the matter.
And I want to offer this is like, for the male listeners, you can take cues from other things, right? Like you can look at people's personalities generally, and then you can ask questions. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't have to be as hard. You know what I mean? Like if you're genuinely interested in somebody, just saying like, hey, is this okay? Like I'm happy to do whatever my ex-boyfriend said a really lovely thing to me. He said, I'm happy to do whatever you want to do. Your comfort is a priority to me.
Yep.
And I was like, I mean, we broke up, but I still was like, amazing. Like, this is what I need my partner to say, is like, whatever you, like, it was like after the first time we had sex, and I was like, so how was it? Like, what happened for you? And he's like, don't worry about me. Like, I'm glad whatever you want to share, I'm happy with, right? And so, like, I know that those are the kind of partnerships I want to be in, someone who's thinking about and prioritizing my comfort. Not, I can't date a trash bag dude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like not in that emotional space. And I think at the point when your self-care and your like love of self, grows, you think about the quality of people you're with, men and women and everybody else, right? Like, you think about the quality of the person, not just like parts touching, because it's like, that's cool, but if they're stupid when you're done, what you gonna do?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. There was another question I wanted to read, and it is, it's a good question. Can you define, or can you talk about the difference between sexual assault and rape?
So, I think that this is such a good question, because this is part of the problem, right? Is when you choose to use what word, right? And I think for some people, they just don't like the word rape. Like, it's too triggering, so they don't want to use that at all. I think we also use that word as like a stranger. And then sexual assault is like a myriad of things could have happened, right? It's an umbrella term. And so I use sexual assault now. Like, initially, the first time I said I was raped, because that's what it felt like to me, versus the second time where it was like, it felt like sexual assault because I totally knew this person. There was so much gray area, versus the first time where it was like, there was no gray area. You were just like doing the extra most. Like, no one invited you to do any of those things, and you just were doing them. And so for me, like, rape feels more like super force, as opposed to sexual assault, which could be literally somebody just like groping you, which is still a form of violation, if that makes sense.
Yep. And also, there was anybody, if you have something to say that isn't a question, you're more than welcome to deliver a comment, and we can talk about that as well. That was never, if you have a comment, go ahead and make your comment as well. Yeah, the sexual assault and rape thing is part of the villainization of what a rapist is, makes it seem like a monstrous, but sexual assault is any number of things, right? So, like you said, a grope, groping somebody in a nightclub is you're putting your hands on their body without permission. That's sexual in nature, and you're putting your hands on their body without permission, sexual assault. So I think there is like this kind of connotation around rape that does seem more violent and aggressive. So that's different state to state things as far as legally, but culturally it definitely does have that connotation. Couple more minutes. We started a little later, so if you have something to say, go for it. If you want to just like shout out, share a little bit, or ask a question, feel free.
No, Michelle. Great question. Have you ever legally reported an offender? No. So here's my thing with that. I do not trust I don't trust our justice system, like, at all. And it is so hard. And this is not meant to discourage anybody. I did not have it in me to fight in a legal capacity, is my answer. I was like just trying not to be insane. So like, then on top of that, trying to get my my history and life and character assassinated publicly, it was not for me. And I think, you know, you have to do what's best for you. And depending on where you live and the laws and whatever, I think that would change things. But I live in Los Angeles in America, and I have not seen that goes well for the woman. And I think times are changing, so I do want to acknowledge the whole like Me Too movement and how that is changing things in some way, but still not in a way that I think. But like, I'm a spiritual person, so like I already know people get taken care of. You know what I mean? Like I just was like, ancestors, every energy that loves me, get them. You know what I mean? And like, and I truly am a believer that people's lives work out in the way that, in the energy that they've put out. And so like, I don't worry about getting revenge on people. There's a lot of people I could get revenge on, but like, I just let them have terrible lives while I work on my glow up. You know what I mean?
Awesome. Well, Natalie, I think this brings our time to an end. Yeah, only on the webinar. I'll probably talk to you in the next 24 hours. But thank you, everyone, for participating in the No Pressure, No Shame, Ask a Survivor with Natalie Patterson webinar. If you want to reach out to her, it is at Natalie is Poetry. Natalie is Poetry.
Correct.
Thanks for hopping on, and you'll receive an email once I finish editing it and uploading it that has the full video. And
I don't know how people are actually on here, but thank you all. I hope to talk to you again.
Yeah, yes, reach out to us, come back for the next webinar, and be on the lookout for more content from us. Thank you very much, and have a good night.